All right, everybody, welcome back to the Learning Out Loud podcast. I'm your host, Dustin William. I have my co-host with me, Whitestone.
I shall now attempt to show how the most important of these principia have been crystallized into the pithy form of maxims and have influenced and developed that grand system of truth known as equity jurisprudence.
The power is neutral. It's sitting in the quintessence until you invoke it. All right, welcome everybody to the first hour of the Learning Out Loud podcast. We are on episode 15. I am your host, Dustin William, owner and producer over at True Life Productions. You can find all of our content over at truelifeproduction.com. You can that's where you can find all aboard, Article 3 articulations, and you can click on the banner right up at the top that says the Learning Out Loud podcast. And yeah, that's where you can find our foundation series. The first 10 episodes are completely free. Go check those out. Transcripts, show notes, all that stuff, all the good stuff. We got breakdowns of all the maxims that we talk about, everything. And there's a lot of very informative stuff over there. And once you get done with that, you can hit the member button and get the second hour of this show today, along with the show notes and everything, all the extra goodness that goes with it, and it's as well as the access to our private Telegram group. There, once you become a member, there will be a button on each episode that you can join the Telegram group from. So, and that's where we'll be dumping a lot of stuff. Whitestone dump stuff in there. We're gonna get it a little more organized. We're just getting it started out, but that is that. So let's introduce our co-host. How's it going, Whitestone?
Oh, I'm doing great. On a point on that Telegram group, I think, we are going to get it more organized, but for right now, I think as we're kind of discovering some things and discovering some nuggets, we're just going to throw those out there for people to kind of chew on. I know that you have posted a couple things, Supreme Court cases, I believe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'm going to post all the Supreme Court cases that we talked about in the Foundation series in there too. So I'm going to get to that. But yeah, sorry.
And then I've got a little snippet in there, about origins, the etymology of the word Vatican, which everybody should go and check out.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And we're going to be using that in a show coming up. Actually, next week, I think we're going to hit the our first in the series of the Holy Roman Germanic Empire. And we are going to talk about the founding of the Vatican, which is going to be super exciting because we're going to bring that etymology stuff into it. And it's going to be, whew, that's some spice. Those are some spicy nuggets right there. Okay. All right. So anything else you want to say about the Telegram channel or anything before we get into Mr. Joseph's story today?
No, I think, once people get in there and start sharing, it'll just kind of grow on its own. But for now, I really am interested in getting to story because it is an entirely different story on its own.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, man, that's, and I've never really did a deep dive on Story before this. I've read a lot of his literature, a lot of his Supreme Court case and stuff, and I knew a little bit about him and stuff. I knew he was the youngest person to ever sit in the Supreme Court. He's still the youngest person to ever be sat in the Supreme Court at the age of 32. And I think he actually, somewhere in here, I'm pretty sure he is credited with actually still authoring the most opinions in the Supreme Court, if I'm remembering right. And plus, on top of all of his literatures, I mean, he was a savant, honestly, and very interesting character. But before we get into him, I actually wanted to get into his father because there's one. So I will say this about Story. He was a Federalist. He did believe in having a big United States government and the Supreme Court basically having rule over the legislative branch, just like they talk about in the Constitution. And so people take a lot of umbrage with that today. But the fact about it is, and that's why I wanted to get into his father a little bit, because I wanted people to understand like where his thought process came from and why he was a Federalist and why he was so adamant about the things he was in in the United States government, because he came from just awesome people, honestly. So real patriots, and his father. Well, we'll get into it. But yeah, and so yeah, and he actually gets talked shit about a lot by other Supreme Court justices and stuff. I think Andrew Jackson called him the most dangerous man in America at one point. So
Which is funny
he's
because Andrew Jackson was a psychopath.
he was a crazy point. Which I mean, I go back and forth on Andrew Jackson. I love him because he got rid of the second bank of the United States. But
Yeah, I love him too, just because his stories about dueling.
yeah, he did. Yeah, he was a fucking nut job for
Yeah,
sure.
he was
Yeah.
absolute.
Yeah, but yeah, and he called Story the most dangerous man in America. So Story, he's had controversy throughout, and we'll get more into it as we go. But yeah, he's just a very interesting character that I wanted to do a deep dive in. So we're gonna jump into his father first, though, Dr. Elijah Story, because he actually did a lot of stuff. We're not gonna go through his whole life, but I want to hit some key points here. So his birth, he was born in Boston in 1743. Elijah Story was born on December 3rd, 1743 in Boston, Massachusetts. His father, William Story, served as Registrar of the Court of Admiralty, a crown-appointed post that placed the Story family at the center of the colonial, legal, and mercantile affairs in Boston. This proximity to royal authority and his father's vulnerability to patriot anger would directly shape Elijah's political consciousness. So then we
You can
get to
already see the formation of the pedigree of thought that would result in Story's work.
yeah, absolutely. And that's what a big reason why I wanted to hit this, because if you don't understand like where Story's thought comes from, then you might not really understand what he's trying to say and his opinions and stuff and why he is thinking in this way. Because I do believe Story was a true patriot. I think he was a man of God. I think he was just I think he was the best Supreme Court justice to ever hit our Supreme Court. But that can be debated. That's a matter of opinion. But I think he was a great man. But Story's dad, Elijah, he trained as a physician and surgeon, and he was a prominent surgeon. We're not going to get too into that, but he did serve in the American Revolution as a surgeon, and he was very well known for his good work in that. But what I did want to get into is so during the Stamp Act riot of 1764, William Story's Admiralty office at the corner of State and Devonshire Street in Boston was among the properties broken into by Patriot protesters, who sought to destroy a royal stamps, books, and official papers. Hold on, I gotta check something real quick. Okay. And royal stamp books and official papers. This event, a direct attack on his father's crown employment, is cited as a formative experience that drew Elijah towards the patriot cause rather than royal loyalty. So this attack on his father's office apparently really soured him towards the royalty. So he goes on 1765 to 1773, and he becomes a member of the Sons of Liberty. Elijah joined the Sons of Liberty, the secret political organization formed across the American colonies to resist British taxation and parliamentary overreach. His name appears on the alphabetical list of the Sons of Liberty, who uh,
I think it says dined.
who dined at Liberty Tree, Dorchester, August 14th, 1769. Compiled by William Parfrey, who was another, he was a really, we could probably do a whole show on him, and held at the Massachusetts Historical Society, placing him among the core Patriot network in Eastern Massachusetts during the years immediately preceding armed conflict. So,
He joined when he was 22.
oh, there you go. There's those numbers always chasing us. Um, and then his marriage, that's not that his first marriage, that wasn't whose story was even who Joseph was born by. It was actually his second marriage. And then he was on November 29th, 1773, Elijah's Story volunteered to guard Dartmouth. A ship carrying the East India Company tea entered Boston Harbor. This act placed him among the vigilant Patriot watch that monitored the tea ships in the weeks leading up to December 16th and to the December 16th action, indicating an organized, premeditated role in the Tea Party operation rather than a spontaneous act. So Joseph Story's father, Elijah Story, was at the very center of the Boston Tea Party. He was basically almost, I mean, he was really one of the guys running the whole thing. He volunteered to guard where the East India ships were coming in. So, and then that brings us to December 16th, 1773, the Boston Tea Party. On the night of December 16th, 1773, Elijah participated in the Boston Tea Party, the coordinated destruction of 342 chests of tea of the British East India Company, tea dumped into the Boston Harbor in protest of the Tea Act of 1773. He was 30 years old. He is also reported to have been one of the two officers involved in stealing two brass cannons stationed at Boston Common, an act of patriot sabotage separate from the harbor action. So you could see like Elijah's story was not fucking around, dude. He was all about that revolution.
I mean, that
Um,
was one of the major turning points in the colonies, really starting to push back.
Yeah, that I mean that's really the event that everybody remembers, right? Is the Boston Tea Party. So and yeah, so apparently Joseph Story's father was right at the center of that. So that's what Story's growing up around. You know, he's seeing his dad being buck wild. But he's being a patriot for that. He obviously truly believed in America and he was not about to let the British East India Company, because that's really what it was the British East India Company trying to come in and take corporate control of America. And he saw that and he wasn't going to let that happen. Um, so that's all I really wanted to get into on Elijah's story because I wanted to kind of build that background into who Joseph's story was and why he thought the way he did, as we'll see as we get in because through story's lifetime. So do you got anything you want to add to that before we move on to story?
No, I just think, it's important to remember that many of the important players in history are not random people. They are
Mm,
definitely either part of royalty or they're part of that network, and they're always going to be front and center on the world stage.
yeah, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And man, it's just this is just that was super interesting to me. That was something I knew before I started researching this, but it really gave me a lot of context to understand who Joseph Story was, and that's a photo story right there. Um, I don't know how old he is there. I think that's when he was a professor of law at Harvard. So we'll start getting into story here. So his parentage and revolutionary background, we don't need to go into that because that's what we just went into. So he was born September 18th, 1779, in Marblehead, Essex County, Massachusetts, the eldest of Dr. Elijah Story's second marriage to Maidabel Patrick. He was the first of 11 children by his mother and one of 18 total children in the combined household. Marblehead was a fishing and maritime town whose charter, Story later wrote, was deeply marked by superstition, eccentric personalities, and distinct dialect, he recalled with affection in his 1831 autobiography. um, yeah,
You
that's
know, it's
crazy. Go ahead. Yep.
um, he's born September 19th. That's a nine and another
September
nine, and then he
18th.
was the first of 11 children.
Well, yeah, 11 to his mother, and then one of 18 total children. He was born on September 18th and one of 18 children, which
But
those
look
are
at
both.
because it's crazy because September is nine, 18 is nine, and then the
Oh, yeah,
last
right,
year is
right.
nine. And then, he's the first of 11 children. So there's your 11. And then one of 18 children, that's another nine. So
Yeah.
just interesting.
Yeah, no, yeah. These numbers are everywhere, man. We can't get away from them for sure. Um, so so his childhood, Story's early education took place at Marblehead Academy under schoolmaster William Harris, later president of Columbia University. His departure from the academy was precipitated by a disciplinary episode which Harris publicly beat him before the school. His father withdrew him immediately. Story recalled the domestic atmosphere of his upbringing as warm, religious, and intellectually stimulating, noting his father's family prayer reading as an early influence on his taste for serious reading and touching eloquence, which I think is great. He had a good dad, so that's awesome. And probably why he was such a savant, I would imagine, because I don't even know how this dude wrote as much as he wrote. Like it's just his literature, and then he wrote over 300 Supreme Court decisions on top of his literature while he was writing that stuff. So I didn't even know how he did it. That's before typewriters. That was before everything.
Well,
Um,
I guarantee that he was learning under the trivium and the quadrivium, or the quadrivium.
oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. That was no, I mean, that wouldn't have even been a question back in the day. That's just how you learned during this time for sure. So that brings us to 1794 to 1798. Story entered Harvard College in January 1795 after early admission and graduated in 1798, finishing second in his class at Harvard. He joined the Adelphi Literary Society and was admitted to Phi Beta Kappa, which we could do a whole show on Phi Beta Kappa. We probably will actually because they are closely connected to Skull and Bones in later years. Anyway, Skull and Bones wasn't even until 1835, but he underwent a significant religious transition, which is I got to say this is something I don't like about Story here because I'm a Calvinist myself, which people was is a misnomer. People really don't understand that term when people say it, like because the whole justified sinners thing, which is Catholic, Jesuit propaganda, I will say. The whole justified sinner thing, that was from the Libertines back when Calvin was in Geneva, which is something we'll get into later because we're going to do tons of shows over the Protestant Reformation. But so he went from being a Calvinist, he underwent a significant religious transition during these years, leaving behind early Calvinist influences and becoming a Unitarian, a belief that would prove politically inconvenient through his early career in federalist dominated Massachusetts, which I believe that for sure because I don't know if we covered it on here, but uh, they call Unitarianism the perfect religion for people who don't believe in God. So,
Oh yeah.
yeah, yeah. So, which Unitarians, they're and he's the founder of Unitarianism. He was Joseph Priestley, and he was part of a breakfast club with Erasmus Darwin back in New Haven, Connecticut, the very place where Yale was basically founded with all of those people. And it's interesting because at this time, the reason Yale was founded was because Harvard was getting away from its Calvinist influence, and that's why they started New Haven and Yale, anyways. But we found out in last show that that was easily manipulated back in after they found that. So, anyways, but that's for another show. Like I said, this is something I didn't really wasn't too tickled about for Mr. Story here. But this is back in the day when Unitarianism was huge. That was a huge movement. And the distinction between Calvinists and Unitarianism, all it is Calvinists are Trinitarians. They believe in the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, and Unitarians are not Trinitarians. They don't believe Jesus was the same substance as God. That's basically the distinction between all Christian sects, actually. But, anyways, moving on from there. So, unless you have something you want to add to that, Whitestone.
I was gonna say it's interesting though, because as a Unitarian, if you don't understand or if you don't recognize the Trinity, trust law is based on the Trinity. Where you've got
Yeah,
essentially, grantor, trustee, beneficiary. Those would be the three main divisions. And so it's just interesting that he wrote all of this jurisprudence and work on equity, which is based on the Trinity, while himself being a Unitarian doesn't align with it.
yeah, I thought the same thing. I was like, that is so interesting that he went from Calvinism to Unitarian, and like it's just, yeah, it really blew my mind that that was the transition that was made. But I get, everybody makes their choices, I guess. So it really it didn't detract from his reading of the law and his relationship with God. I don't believe because I mean, you can read his equity jurisprudence books, and they're definitely divinely inspired, in my opinion. And I think people felt that way when they came out too. He got praise in England for all of his literature, but we'll read about that later. So, 1798 to 1801, after graduating Harvard, Story read law in the offices of Samuel Sewall in Marblehead and then Samuel Putnam in Salem. Sewall had presided as a judge during the Salem witch trials, which I also thought was very interesting for Story to study under him. And and come away with what he did in the law. But aftermath and later became Chief Justice of the Massachusetts Supreme Court. So the guy who was presiding judge in the Salem witch trials later became Chief Justice of the Massachusetts Supreme Court. That is Samuel Sewall. So Story was admitted to the bar July 1801. He later described the early study of law as a period of intellectual difficulty and emotional restlessness, but also as formative in his methodological approach to legal scholarship. So, yeah, yeah, I thought that was very interesting. But so Story opened his law practice in Salem and initially struggled to attract clients, in part because his Unitarian religious view and affiliation with the Republican Party were unpopular in Federalist Massachusetts. He gradually built a reputation, particularly in commercial and maritime law. In 1804, he married Mary Lind Fitch Oliver, the daughter of a Salem merchant. She died June 1805, less than a year after their marriage, and just 2 months after the death of his father, which is tragic. So Story, moving on to from 1805 to 1807, Story was elected to the Massachusetts House of Representatives in 1805, serving until 1807. He served again briefly in 1810 to 1811. His legislative work included speeches on the establishment of judicial salaries, debates on the Embargo Act, and reports on the creation of courts of chancery, of course. William Wetmore Story described his father during this period as one of the Republican Party's leading voices in the legislature, noted his career reasoning and effective oratory. Okay. So you got anything you want to add to that before we move on?
No, I just find the Salem witch trials link there very interesting. I think we could probably do a whole show on what the Salem witch trials were.
Oh yeah, I would love to do a show on that, honestly, especially knowing that Story studied under a guy who was a judge during the Salem. That just adds a completely other dimension to it that I had never even considered before, you know. Yeah, I also thought that was very interesting, a very interesting point, especially after his this is after his religious transition, and then he goes to Salem, Massachusetts, of all places, to study law under the people who were presiding over the Salem witch trial. So, yeah, yeah, interesting links back then, man. Interesting stuff. So that moves us on to his second marriage to Sarah Waldo Wetmore, the daughter of Judge William Wetmore of Boston. The marriage proved lasting and deeply affectionate. The couple had 7 children together, but only 2 survived to adulthood: a daughter Mary and a son, William Wetmore Story, who would become a noted sculptor, poet, and the editor of his father's collected letters and biography, which is where I pulled most of this information from, is a book called The Life and Letters of Joseph Story. A lot of this is from Volume 1 because that's where a lot of Story's biography is. But after Volume 1 was released, uh, William kind of he put in there kind of a letter asking people for correspondence between him and his father. So he did release a Volume 2 of The Life and Letters of Joseph Story after that, which is more of his correspondence with like his um, it would probably be more of his judicial, more of the judicial aspect of his life. Um, so, but that brings us to 1808 to 1809. Story served a partial term in the United States House of Representatives, filling the vacancy uh, created by the death of Jacob Corning Shield. His congressional service included a speech opposing the Embargo Act and another on the increase of the Navy. He declined re-election, dissatisfied with the direction of the Jeffersonian policy, and drawn back to his legal career in Massachusetts. And then, so that's when we start getting into um, when Story really started to make a name for himself in the in the law community. So in 1810, he argues Fletcher v. Peck, 6 U.S. 87. That is the exact citation if you want to look that case up on library or loc.gov. So he argues that case before the Supreme Court. Story argues on behalf of defendant John Peck and Fletcher v. Peck, the first case in which the Supreme Court struck down a state law as unconstitutional. At issue was whether the Georgia legislature could revoke a land grant after its membership had accepted bribes in approving it. The court held in Story's client's favor that the state legislature could not void a completed contract and that the subsequent purchaser, like Peck, held valid title as innocent third parties, which we are going to get into a summation of that case after we get done going through Story's life. It's yeah, it's interesting stuff right there. Um, so you got anything you would like to add, Whitestone?
No, I think it would be really important to do a deep dive on Joseph Story's very first Supreme Court case, just considering his life and his pedigree and his upbringing, and coming right out of the gate, on a Supreme Court case. I think it's very important we look into that.
Yeah, yeah, and I do have that case available. We're just going to go through a summation of it today. We're going to kind of get a feel of it, but I think I think it's like 100 some pages. It's a huge case. So, yeah, we should really do a whole deep dive on that case because I'm sure it's very interesting. Um, and I'm pretty sure it's an equity case if I remember right. So that brings us to 1811, Speaker of the Massachusetts House, Supreme Court nomination. In 1811, Story was chosen Speaker of the Massachusetts House of Representatives. That same year, Associate Justice William Cushing died, creating a vacancy on the Supreme Court. President James Madison nominated Story on November 15th, 1811, after three earlier candidates, including John Quincy Adams, uh, and declined or were rejected. Story, at 32 years old, was confirmed by the Senate on November 18th, 1811, becoming the youngest person ever nominated to serve on the United States Supreme Court, a record that remains unbroken as of 2026, the year we are in right now, which is impressive. That is pretty impressive. 32 years old. Um, So, February 3rd, 1812, he's sworn in. Story took the oath of office as Associate Justice on February 3rd, 1812, and was allotted to the First Circuit, which he would ride for the remainder of his life. His circuit covered Massachusetts, Rhode Island, New Hampshire, and Maine, requiring him to hold court twice yearly in each state, in addition to his regular attendance at the Supreme Court in Washington. The travel demands of circuit riding remained one of the most physically taxing aspects of his tenure throughout his career. Yeah, were you aware of how circuit courts got their name?
No, I was not aware of that.
Yeah, the history of circuit courts is actually interesting. The way they got their name is that back in the day, so that like it says here, his circuit covered Massachusetts, Rhode Island, New Hampshire, and Maine, requiring him to hold court twice yearly in each state. So they would literally have to ride a freaking horse to each one of these states twice a year to hold court, and that's when they adjudicated all the decisions, and that's how it got its name because they would literally ride their horses in a circuit and do their adjudication there. Which
And I'm
yeah,
sure there's some occult reason for that.
oh for sure, yeah, sir. You get into circuit that just that's basically energy. What is a circuit breaker and
Yeah,
in electricity? So.
it's like when and where geographically are which decisions made and in what order, kind of like the timing of any electrical circuit
Oh,
where,
dude, I wonder if we could look into that. What routes he actually took, or
yeah,
what
we
routes
could.
any
I
of
mean,
these?
in a previous life, I was actually an instructor for basic electrical theory. So,
Oh, nice.
I could draw on some of that, if we could actually get a map of when he would preside and where, and draw that out as a sketch and see if we can look at it like an electrical circuit.
Oh, I bet I could find that. I bet man, I bet it draws a sigil or something. Oh, I would because there was only a few circuits back in the day.
Yeah,
So
we better be
yeah,
careful what we're drawing.
right. But I mean, we all know, these cities and these towns are all built on ley lines. Who's the guy that has the book on that? Do you remember? What's his name? There's a few books on it, but I can't remember. There's a particular guy that I followed that wrote a book on all of the ley lines
I thought
throughout the
James
world.
Shelby Downard had done something on ley lines, but I
He
could be.
Yeah, he's done a lot of work on ley lines too. That's not who I'm thinking of, but no, that is another great source on ley lines for sure. Yeah, especially he gets into. Does he get into it in King Kill 33, or is that other work?
Oh, that I'm not sure. I think there are references to ley lines in there, but I don't think it's an expose on ley lines themselves. But he definitely makes references to where
Okay.
certain events took place.
Yeah, yeah, I think you're probably right about that. Yeah, but yeah, that would be super interesting to look into because yeah, knowing about ley lines and all that stuff, there's got to be, they don't name these things on accident for sure.
Well, no, because I mean it's the same way with roads. Because if you think about the way that
Yep.
roads connect cities and connect towns and the shapes that they make, and you have people in vehicles driving around with intent and purpose in a certain shape, those do create, energy centers. Or I mean, a lot of it goes back to the electrical circuit as well. That's why roads are shaped the way that they are, and it's no surprise that the circuit courts are, the same thing.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, yeah, that's what is it, Route 66 that goes all the way through America, and that's supposed to be directly on a ley line pretty much the whole time. And then you get into the whole Isaac Cappy thing. I don't know if you know about that, but that's a whole fucking other wild,
No,
wild
I'm not
story.
familiar with that, but I do know that, Route 66, the reason that it's branded, there's like an entire culture and I guess tradition around that route. And then, a lot of the things that are along that route, you look at that and you can figure out what's the nature of the thing that they're trying to tell you.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And that's
So,
yeah, the reason I bring up Isaac Cappy, that our audience might be familiar, but he was kind of a Hollywood whistleblower. I don't want to say the hot words because we're on the first hour and this goes out on all the social medias, but he was a Hollywood whistleblower. People will understand what I'm talking about then. But he quote unquote offed himself on a highway on Highway 66 over a ramp, and it's supposed to be a whole esoteric land plot there. So yeah, but yeah, just to connect it to broader topics with what we're talking about. Um, so we'll move on. We'll start get back to Joseph's story here. Start talking about ley lines. So from 1812 to 1816, Story's early years on the court were marked by an immersion in admiralty and prize law, the dominant legal challenges of the War of 1812 era.
oh, wow.
Yeah, he administered equity jurisdiction on his circuit with a thoroughness his son described as transformative, and I will agree with that. Developing doctrine in an area that had been largely underdeveloped in American courts. Chief Justice Marshall quickly recognized Story as his most capable and intellectually aligned colleague, and the two formed a jurisprudential alliance that would define the Marshall's Court nationalist character, which I think is great because I like Justice John Marshall too. He was a Federalist too, but it is what it is. Like I said back in the day, these guys, yeah, they really believed in. I think a lot of the Federalists actually believed in the United States and what it was supposed to be, and what I do think it was for a while. I think these guys really did have good intentions. Even I know they're Freemasons and blah blah blah, but whatever, whatever, dude.
I mean, I
Freemasons
know
are.
there's definitely factions within those secret societies where some do have the deep esoteric knowledge and they truly believe that it can be used to bring light and good and justice to the world. But on the other hand, if it's put into the wrong hands, it can be used the other way. So who's to say, a lot of the history that we read is not just it's nothing more than just factions of secret societies fighting amongst one another for, either good or
Dude,
ill.
that's all it is. That's really all history is secret societies fighting for control, in my opinion, and just trying to stay under the
Yep.
radar.
And
You
like I
know,
said, I truly do believe that there are people out there that, you know, are actually trying to do good. Um,
Yeah, so do I. That, and because we both believe in the Kabbalion. That's one of our favorite pieces of literature right there. And in there they talk about the law of duality. You can't have light without darkness. You can't have darkness
Right.
without light. So if there's people out there doing, and that's one thing that really brought me to where I am is understanding that there is pure evil in the world. It's out there. Believe me, it's out there. If you all
It
you got to
really
do is
is.
look a little bit. And but knowing what I know about the laws of duality, if there's pure evil, then there's pure light. and there's everything in between that spectrum. So it's not, as bad as it seems. The media just wants you to believe that because they're in control of your perceptions. So once you step away from that and you actually get into reading something else, not watching the news and not watching all this crazy stuff go on around the world, and really I like to get more localized in everything doing, there's a great Buddhist philosophy, tend the parts of the garden that you can reach, meaning, change the stuff in the life in your life that you have the ability to change. And then, don't worry about everything else. Meditate on it is what I like to do. And that's, I would love to do like a group meditation kind of thing. I've done a few of them before. Have you ever done like a group meditation?
Um, no, I'm not like a people person. A lot of that's not true. I mean, like I said, I spent most of my career, teaching and public speaking. But for me, when it comes to, things of that nature, I kind of see it as the difference between public and private. You can do certain things when you're in public with other people and reach certain areas, but when you're in private, it's much different. But I do think that, a group of people concentrating and having intent towards the same goal, as long as it's benevolent and it's for light, absolutely is a good thing and should be encouraged.
Yeah, yeah. Meditating in private and meditating in a group setting is two completely different things. Absolutely, for sure. But I do like I mean there's even scientific studies on this of they've done like group meditations all throughout the world and actually changing the Schumann resonance and stuff like that. So yeah, it's crazy stuff. But we're getting a little off subject there. But my whole point behind this is that like people talk a lot of shit about the founding fathers and how they were Freemasons and it's all just a secret society plot and there's nothing good in the world and the Constitution is just another tool of control and blah 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 and this and that and all the other thing and I you can think like that. Go ahead. That seems like a terrible way to live your life, in my opinion. But I'm going to read between the lines and I'm going to look into the people that I truly do were thinking, trying to do something good. And I do believe all the way up until the Civil War, we did have a good country. I don't know how you feel about that, Whitestone, but I
I
do.
feel that the creation of this country and the structure of it is just like anything else in the world. It can be used as a tool or it can be used as a weapon. You can use it for creation or you can use it for destruction. And I think that what's beautiful about the structure of our system is that it does have that duality kind of, in the nature of it. And we have to decide, what are we going to use it for? Are we going to use it as a tool or are we going to use it as a weapon?
Yeah, absolutely. Everything is a
And the
tool.
people that are running it right now, we know what it is that they're using it as.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's a great point. Everything is a tool. It's all in how you wield it, for sure. So we're trying to wield the tools of light over here and really and bring light to the situation because we're in a dark spot right now, but it doesn't have to be like that. All we got to do is raise our consciousness a little bit, and that's why I bring up meditation and stuff. But anyways, getting back to Mr. Story here. We get to 1813. Uh in 1813, Story wrote the court's opinion in Fairfax Device v. Hunter's Lessee, holding that the Treaty of Paris of 1783, we should really dig into this one too, protected the land claims of the British loyalists in Virginia from confiscation by the state. The Virginia Court of Appeals refused to comply with the Supreme Court's mandate, setting up a direct constitutional confrontation that would culminate in the landmark 1816 Martin v. Hunter's Lessee decision. Chief Justice Marshall recused himself due to a family interest in the Fairfax land. Oh, I did not even realize that. But yeah, that is a whole nother case we would have to get into right there for sure. I actually meant to make a summation of that case, but I didn't have time to. So but I mean, we should really do a whole, maybe I'll line that up where we just go through a couple of these opinions here because as we get further in, we'll see some more landmark opinions that Mr. Story is a part of, and that I guarantee that's a good one to look into. Do you
Yeah,
know
that'd
anything
be a
about
great
that
one to
case?
get into because 1783, I always get this mixed up. Is the Treaty of Paris and the Treaty of Peace the same thing?
Yeah, I think that's interchangeable
Yeah, because
for
there were the
sure.
three
Yeah,
parties to it. There was
yeah,
three representatives from the United States, the Duke of Luxembourg, which was the representative of the Holy Roman Empire, and I think King George or a representative. And so it's
yep,
basically between uh, the crown and the United States.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's basically a trust document, really, where I think it's basically the we're the beneficiaries and King George is the would be the grantor, right? Is that if I'm remembering
I
it
don't. I'd
right?
have to read the case and what title the British loyalists were holding.
Yeah.
If it was beneficial title or if it was legal title. I'd have to dig into it a little bit just to kind of see what relationship they're trying to highlight there.
Yeah, yeah, and we'll just have to do a whole show over the Treaty of Paris of 1783 because that's a whole yeah, that's a whole nother rabbit hole right there. And a lot of controversy over that thing because a lot of people don't understand what they're reading when they do read it. Because really it is just a trust document, but people think because King George still had control, like they don't like it gave us beneficiary status pretty much, which gives us the right to act the way we in certain ways today. So
Yeah, and I'm pretty sure that was the huge cementing piece in the creation of the private mortgage trust of, what we call this country and the land in it, and the
yes,
posterity
yes,
that gets to use it
exactly.
afterwards. It's a huge
Yes.
piece.
Yes, yeah, that's exactly right. Because actually, right after this 1789, that's when the Constitution was created. So, yeah, there's a very big chain of events that happens right there that has a lot of misunderstanding around it for
Yeah,
sure.
it's
So
like they
yeah, we
created the trust relationship in 1783, and then they enshrined it and protected it in the provisions of the Constitution in 1789, a couple years later.
that's basically how I see it for sure. Yeah. So that brings us to March 20th, 1816. Uh, Hunter Martin v. Hunter Lacey, 14 U.S. 304. So Story delivered the unanimous opinion in Martin v. Hunter's Lacey, 1816, the first case to assert definitive Supreme Court appellate authority over states' courts in all civil matters involving the federal constitution, statutes, and treaties, writing for a court from which Marshall had again recused himself. Story grounded federal judicial supremacy in the text of Article 3 and the nature of the constitutional compact itself, arguing that the Constitution was ordained not by the states in the sovereign capacity, but directly by the people of the United States. Historian Charles Warren would later call this decision the keystone of the whole arch of federal judicial power. So basically, Joseph Story is the one who really created federal judicial power through this case.
And that's a
Uh,
powerful statement there that the
yeah,
Constitution was not ordained by the states in their sovereign capacities, but by the
absolutely.
people of the United States.
Yes. Yeah, which yeah, that's a big distinction right there. Huge
Yeah.
distinction.
And if the
Yep.
people of the United States have vested their judicial power in a Supreme Court, then therefore the people speaking kind of have ordained the federal judicial power thereby.
That's how Story read it. That's how I read it. I do believe, the law circles that we follow, that's how they understand it too, right? Because I mean, the
Yeah.
process that we follow, that we use the Constitution as our authority. That is the
And
only
they're
authority that we
making
use.
references to the keystone and the arch, which are Masonic terms, and when they speak of
Yes.
federal judicial power.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, yeah. I didn't even catch that. The keystone of the whole art. Yeah. I bet Charles Warren is a fucking Freemason for sure.
And
That's,
I
yeah, good catch.
just to put another thing on the docket, we really should look into that word keystone and
Yeah.
its use because I don't know, one of the industries that I have just left, Keystone was a massive player, and it's tied into how we build things, where construction materials come from, and if you follow that all up the chain, you find that that word keystone is actually at the top of the building industry, the construction industry, which again relates
Mm.
to the operative side of masonry, which is the building side. That would be something I think, lend a lot of info to,
Yeah, that
just
would
based
be
on my own
great.
experience.
Yeah, I mean, I want to do a whole series just on Freemasonry, modern Freemasonry, anyway, starting at 1717 when the modern iteration of Freemasonry started,
Yeah,
and
and
maybe the
what
older
would
stuff
really
too.
be interesting if we did an entire show on the history of the construction industry and building going all the way back to the formation of this country. I think that would be interesting as well.
Oh, that would be really interesting, especially with, I mean, we're both in the construction industry and have been our whole lives, and you have been, right? Pretty much your whole life.
Yeah, I mean, I've been around in several industries, the construction side, the renewable energy side, and some of the administrative and transportation side as well. And just in, let's see, let's see, 8 years, 2 years, 5 years. So yeah, let's just call it what, 15 years. Um, just seeing the footprints and the signature everywhere,
Yeah. Yeah,
from the
absolutely.
moving
Yeah.
of products, from the creation of products to these massive corporations that have subsidiaries. And if you look at all of their names, a lot of that is a cult as well. And so I truly think that the massive amount of the construction industry is the operative side, the defunct, dark operative side of masonry, basically operating everywhere.
Yeah, and I would totally agree with that. And that I mean, really, we're kind of dipping into Tartaria there a little bit with like the founding of this country and the founding of the buildings. Were they
Yep.
really building these buildings, but
Yeah,
or
and
did the
what
free,
methods were they actually using,
Yeah, yeah.
but that's the thing. What's crazy about, talking about Joseph's story is that you cannot talk just about Joseph's story.
No,
Is
you can't.
there
Yeah.
there are so many links to the formation of this country, to the way that we interpret legal decisions, to the way that we look at, just everything. There's ties everywhere. Commerce, admiralty, the mortgage trust, like the whole shebang. Story
Speaking
really is
of,
at the heart of this story.
yeah, speaking of, since we're already on this tangent a little bit, isn't it you that told me about him mentioning the starports and commentaries on the Constitution?
Oh, yes. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
so yeah, Joseph Story's commentaries on the Constitution of the United States does make reference to two star forts. He does not call them star forts. I believe he calls them either batteries or forts. But when you look up, he made reference to it because once George Washington was hired to run the military,
Hmm.
I say that very generally. The first thing he did was he took over those two star forts, and if you go and look at them, they're a couple miles apart from one another, but there's definitely something going on there. That his first act in his military capacity was to seize and take control of those two forts.
Which gets right back into the energy, ley lines, all of that stuff,
Yep.
because we all
It's
know
all,
what
yep,
them star forts
100%.
are, man. Yep, absolutely. So yeah, yeah, I love that point because yeah, you can't get into story without talk, obviously, because we've gone off on so many tangents here today, man. But yeah, what an interesting conversation because he and I didn't realize actually how central he really was to really the founding the judicial aspect of our country, man. And you read right here, he basically was the one who started it. He interpreted I believe Article 3 in the correct way and gave them judicial power. And that's this is a part of controversy right here because people don't like the Constitution, states' rights advocates and stuff, which I like. I'm all about the states' rights too, but the way everything is set up right now, the Constitution is the authority, and then it kind of trickles down from there. But um, anyways, let's keep going on with Mr. Story here. So, 1816 to 1820. In February 1816, William Pinckney, the foremost advocate at the American bar, offered Story his entire Baltimore practice worth an estimated $20,000 annually if Story would resign from the court. Story ultimately declined, writing that he preferred the solid frame resting upon judicial exposition over the more lucrative but ephemeral reputation of courtroom advocacy. He also declined on a salary of $3,500 per year. This decision defined the terms of his life's work, which I think that's a great little story about
Wow.
Joseph's Story right
He
there.
basically
Yeah.
tried to bribe him. He's like, "Hey, will you get off that bench and maybe just come make money at the practice?" And he's like, "Yeah, no, I like kind of forming the foundation of the principles that are going to guide this country, not use my brain to go make money at your paltry little practice."
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, he took it at a substantial pay cut too. I mean, he said he was making, that dude's making $20,000 a year back in 1816. And Story's making $3,500 a year. I mean, that right there, goes to my point. That shows that I believe Story was a true honorable man. And we're
I
gonna,
agree.
yeah, bolster that point a little bit here and a couple of the other points about him. So,
Godly,
eight,
godly and righteous men should always forego material possessions in the acquisition of wealth,
yeah.
in favor of standing on principle.
Yeah,
100%.
Absolutely, absolutely. And that's why I do believe he was the greatest Supreme Court justice to ever grace our Supreme Court. So we get from 1819 to 1820 circuit charges on the slave trade and La Jean Eugene. Beginning in 1819, Story delivered a series of forceful circuit court charges to grand juries condemning the Atlantic slave trade as a violation of the law of nations. In his circuit court opinion, the United States v. Lejeune Eugene, he held that the slave trade was contrary to natural law and international law, though he declined to apply the ruling extraterritorially to a French vessel. These charges and opinions proceeded and sharply contrasted with his later Prigg decision. Which I mean, yeah, that's a matter of opinion there. If because I do believe Story is probably looking at it through a lens of equity. So he's really just doing the right thing because he didn't go extraterritorially onto the French vessel. He just read the law in the right way. So
It's
did you?
interesting too that he started out in doing admiralty cases and
Hmm.
prize because prize is the what would you call it? The treasures of war on the ocean or on the
Yes.
waters, and
On
booty
land,
is
it's
the treasures
booty.
of war on
Yep.
land.
Yep.
And there's another reference to this. I think it's a deleted scene. You have to look for it in Pirates of the Caribbean, and I think it's in one of the
Mm.
later movies where they show the reason why it is that Jack Sparrow and that character Beckett had such a falling out is because I believe that at one point Jack Sparrow was working for Beckett and ended up leaving, and the line that he told him is that people are not cargo, mate, and ended up
Mm.
that's why he ended up leaving. And so later on, um, because I think it's in, I don't know, maybe the fourth or the fifth one that they show that way before the movies had even started, Sparrow was working on one of the ships that Beckett had owned and ended up leaving because he said people are not cargo, making reference to
Mm.
the East India Company being involved in slave trade.
Yeah, aren't those movies all about like the East India Company and
Yeah, it
all that
definitely
stuff back
has to
then?
do with that whole vein. There's so many references we could get into with those movies. But again, I just wanted to draw the parallel because Story was adjudicating cases based in maritime, and now he's also talking about the slave trade and everything else. So I definitely think there's a reference there to where, people are not cargo. And I think in the movie, the people that were cargo were not, they were all different types of people, all different colors of people. So, this just adds another layer to the
Yeah,
story, I guess.
absolutely. And yeah, it's interesting you say that because we'll learn later he actually adjudicated another Supreme Court case about uh a slave ship basically, and these people were trying to steal these slaves, but Justice Story felt that he felt differently about how these feel, but we'll read about that in a little bit. Let's get there. So, 1820 to 1825, Story participated actively in the Massachusetts Constitutional Convention of 1820, speaking against proposals to reduce the salaries of state judges. He also drafted what became known as the Crimes Act, codifying federal criminal law, one of many instances in which he performed substantial legislative drafting work behind the scenes. During this period, oh, I didn't even, yeah, I guess I didn't even realize that. During this period, he also drew up the rules of equity practice for his circuit and began contributing substantial articles to Encyclopedia Americana. Oh, dude, I didn't even know there was an Encyclopedia Americana. I'm gonna have to look for that.
Yeah, it's just another set of books I'm gonna have to get.
Yeah. Yep, absolutely. So it gets us to 1825 to 1829, final pre-Harvard years correspondence with Lord Sowell. Story delivered the Phi Beta Kappa oration at Harvard in 1826 and the Continental Discourse on the Settlement of Salem in 1828. He corresponded extensively with Lord Stowell, the leading English Admiralty jurist, including a significant exchange on the case of the slave Grace in 1827. He declined the Royal Professorship of Law at Harvard, but by 1829 had accepted the newly established Dane Professorship, a position that would allow him to remain on the court while teaching. And they made that. that position just for Joseph Story because he turned down the royal professorship because he wouldn't be able to be in the Supreme Court anymore. So they made him a position where he could still participate in the Supreme Court. So, which I thought was pretty cool. So August 25th, 1829, Story was inaugurated as the first Dane professor at law at Harvard University alongside John H. Ashmund as royal professor. The professorship had been established by donation of uh, Nathan Dane, who specifically named Story as his preferred appointee. Story's inaugural discourse treated the value of his jurisprudence as a science and laid out the intellectual mission of the new law school with what his son described as dignity of style and vigorous and glowing passages. He would hold the professorship simultaneously with a Supreme Court seat for the remaining 16 years of his life. Okay. So we get to his autobiography in January 23rd, 1831, writing from Washington on January 23rd, 1831, Story composed an autobiographical letter to his 13-year-old son, William, covering his parentage, childhood, religious development, and early legal career. The letter is the primary first-person account of Story's formative years and reproduced as the opening chapters of the life and letters of Joseph Story. He describes writing quote, very frankly and freely in a manner of which would not be justifiable if this were designed for the public. Which, yeah, like I said, this is where I pulled a lot of this information from, and you can get the Life and Letters of Joseph Story, Volume 1, right on archive.org. I'll probably throw it in the Telegram chat too, actually. But yeah, it's a pretty good letter. I liked it. It's a pretty good. It actually inspired me. I think I'm going to do the same thing with my son. Probably write him a letter explaining everything when he's about that age too. So pretty cool thing. Um, so you got anything else before we get into his literature?
No, let's go into what he wrote.
Okay, cool. So yeah, I thought we were gonna have time to get into Supreme Court cases today, but apparently Mr. Story is a lot more interesting than I first realized. So we'll just finish up with this timeline, and then we'll be jumping on to hour two. But here we get into 1833 or 1832. Sorry. Um, Story published his commentaries on the law of bailments in 1832, the first in what would become a 9-volume series of legal treatises. The work was dedicated to Samuel Putnam, under whom Story had read law. It was immediately praised on both sides of the Atlantic and went through multiple editions during his lifetime. By the time of his death, his book royalties alone earned $10,000 per year, more than double his $4,500 annual salary as Associate Justice, which you see right there. A man of God turned down the greedy money from the lawyer, and then now he's making basically, pretty close to the equivalent amount after he just writes a book on his own. Doesn't sell his soul. So I thought that was a pretty cool point of Mr. Story right there. So then we move on to 1833, and this is the book we were just talking about. He publishes commentaries on the Constitution of the United States. Story publishes his 3-volume commentaries on the Constitution of the United States in 1833, the second comprehensive treatise on the provision of the Constitution, and the work for which he is best remembered as a scholar, and I will agree with that. It attacked doctrines on state sovereignty and nullification, arguing for a broad nationalist reading of federal powers. The commentaries received immediate praise from Chief Justice Marshall, Chancellor Kent, and leading jurists in England and continental Europe, and remains a foundational text of American constitutional scholarship. So you've dug into that book a lot more than I have. You've read quite a bit of it, haven't you? Oh
So
no,
I looked at,
commentaries on the Constitution.
oh yeah, commentaries on the Constitution is a very good read. So it opens up. He does an exposition on the formation of each individual of the original 13 colonies. So
Nice.
all of the 13 colonies, he goes into how they were formed, what charters, who was involved, some of the issues that they had, back and forth with the king. Some of them had their charters revoked. Some were pretty much left alone. And then he goes into the Constitution after that. It's a very, very good read. It's very telling. If you look at it with sort of the eyes that we look at it, which is the story that we're all living is much larger, much broader. You know, we get into star forts and everything like that. You can pick a lot of
Hmm.
that stuff out in there.
Yeah, nice, nice. Yeah, I know
Um,
you've dug into that a lot more than I have. So,
and then the law of bailments as well. That was going to be my next story read because
oh, okay.
uh, it's commentaries on the law of bailments with illustrations from the civil and foreign law. That is the full title.
Okay, nice,
And
nice.
a great resource for these legal texts is a website called the Law Book Exchange.
Hmm.
Um, they're based in New Jersey. Their address is 33 Terminal Avenue. So,
Of course it is.
um, but the Law of Bailments, is published in 1832. Its final edition, the ninth by James Shower, was published in 1878. Basically, it's a let's see. His many treatises, most of them on aspects of commercial law, were deeply influential and often cited today. This is the only complete and satisfactory treatise upon the law of bailments, which completely exhausts the whole learning applicable to the subject. Whatever
Huh.
was to be found in the English and American decisions, whatever the Roman and continental jurisprudence afforded in illustration of the law of bailments, Mr. Story collected and combined with surprising industry and wonderful learning. He investigates each branch of the subject as a distinct and separate title. Um, and then it says down at the bottom, had he written no other work than this, his reputation as a learned jurist, not only among his countrymen, but foreigners, would have been secure. So,
Oh, wow, that's impressive.
yeah.
I mean,
So,
yeah, that's impressive. Nice. Yeah, I actually haven't gotten into that book at all, but I mean, that makes you want to read it, right? That's pretty cool, man. I mean, what an impressive man, dude. That is crazy. At the same time, he's doing Supreme Court decisions as he's
yes,
writing all this stuff. It's absolutely mind-blowing. So,
nobody understands the world that we live in more than this man.
yeah, I don't think so, dude. I mean, he's very impressive. So that brings us to 1834. He keeps writing Conflicts of Law published. And this is the death of Chief Justice Marshall. So, Story publishes commentaries on conflicts of law, which we have pulled from in a previous episode. I can't remember which one, but it's in the Foundation series. I have looked into this book just a little bit. But it's a treatise on private international law that gained immediate recognition in Germany, France, and England. The same year, Chief Justice Marshall's declining health was a source of deep anxiety to Story. He had aligned himself politically and jurisprudentially with Marshall since 1812. Marshall died on July 6th, 1835. Story delivered a memorial discourse and composed ele- elegiac verses for a proposed cent- what, cenotaph. I don't even know what those words mean. Do you know what those are? An
Let me
elegiac?
take a crack. Yeah, Marshall died on July 6, 1835. Story delivered a memorial discourse and composed, yeah, I don't know,
Yeah.
elegiac verses for a proposed cenotaph.
Huh. I'm assuming that's a specific type of oration. Huh.
Yeah,
Interesting.
it's got to be some kind of, let's see. El Elegiac is primarily a misspelling of the correct term. Oh, anyway, I just spelled it wrong, which refers to the poetry or art that is mournful, reflective, and characterized by sorrow for something lost or irrevocably past.
Okay. So that makes sense for a eulogy. Okay.
Sadness, nostalgia, lamentation, often associated with death or the passage of time. So it's an artful eulogy.
Interesting. Yeah. So yeah, and so in that story wrote that losing Marshall left him the quote last of the old race of judges. And you will find, and yeah, we'll get into it a little bit here. After Marshall died, Story is not favored in the Supreme Court, which actually that brings us to what we talked about a little bit earlier. So 1835, 1836 denied chief justiceship. And this is when he released commentaries on equity jurisprudence. After Marshall's death in 1835, Story was widely regarded as the most qualified candidate for Chief Justice. However, President Andrew Jackson, who had reportedly called Story, quote, the most dangerous man in America, appointed Roger B. Taney instead. Story passed over, became increasingly isolated within a court whose constitutional direction diverged sharply from his own. During this period, he had also published his commentaries on equity jurisprudence, which was praised by English barristers and judges as a master work. And I will 100% agree with that, and I bet you will too. That equity jurisprudence is definitely one of the most impressive pieces of literature that I've ever written
Oh, it's yeah.
or
I
read.
mean,
Sorry.
it's substantial.
Absolutely. Yeah.
If you read nothing else, if you just read equity jurisprudence, you'll have a completely different view of the world.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what I tell everybody. Read the first three chapters of Equity Jurisprudence, Volume 1, and then go to Volume 2 and read Chapter 33 on implied trusts. And you're going to understand the world in a completely different way than you did before because you're going to understand where equity comes from, how we use it, how it's used in the court system, and then you're going to understand what an implied trust is, which is what everything that we live in today is implied trusts. Implied spendthrift trusts is everything that we deal with today. But anyways, that's a homework item for everybody to go read because we're getting up on the hour here. So let's get these last points in here. So January term, 1841. Oh, and this is the case I was talking about before, the United States v. the Amistad. Will you look, so that's a Spanish word. Will you look up what that means in English real quick? It's interesting.
Yep.
I just forget off the top of my head. Okay, so Story wrote the majority opinion in United States v. the Amistad, holding that 53 Africans who had been illegally captured and transported aboard a Spanish schooner, Amistad, and who had taken control of the vessel in a mutiny were not slaves under any applicable law and must be freed. The case turned on whether the captives had been lawfully enslaved under Spanish law. Story found that they had not been. As of 1820, as the 1820 treaty with the Spain prohibited the African slave trade, the court freed the surviving Africans. They returned to Sierra Leone in January of 1842, which that's a very interesting case. I actually have read that one. I have it in audiobook actually. If anybody's interested, I might just drop that in the Telegram. But yeah, it's a very interesting case to read. Did you find that definition of it?
I did, and so they actually make a pop culture reference here because there was a movie about it. But
Okay.
Amistad refers primarily to the 1839 mutiny above the Spanish slave ship La Amistad and the subsequent 1997 film directed by Steven Spielberg that dramatizes the event. Um,
Oh, I didn't even know about that.
yeah,
Huh.
and so when you look at the actors, there's Morgan Freeman, Anthony Hopkins, Matthew McConaughey, and Nigel Hawthorne. So you got some of the big players in here. So it's definitely an important movie when they use big people like that. Um, let's see, the historical event in July of 1839, enslaved Mende people led by Joseph Klinke rebelled against their captors on the schooner La Amistad off the coast of Cuba. After being seized by the U.S. revenue cutter Washington in August of 1839, Washington is likely the name of another ship. The
Yeah.
captives faced a complex legal battle over whether they were free men or Spanish property. The U.S. Supreme Court ruled in 1841 that the Africans had been illegally kidnapped and ordered their release and returned to Sierra Leone. And then it goes and talks about the movie in 1997.
Oh,
Uh,
interesting.
yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I didn't even know there was a movie about it. But so the Amistad is that's a Spanish word, and the translation from Spanish to English is friendship. So they were aboard the slave ship Friendship, which I thought was very interesting.
Wow.
But isn't that cute? Um, but yeah, this is a really good read because they get into all of the details of how the mutiny actually happened on the ship, and you're like rooting for these guys the whole time. You're like, fuck yeah, dude, because they realized there was more of them than there was of their captors. So they just said, fuck it, we're taking this thing over, and they brought it to America. And yeah, Joseph Story set them free, sent them back to their home. Thought it was pretty
Wow.
cool. Yeah. Yep. So all right, that brings us his next big case was Prigg v. Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, 41 U.S. 539, and Story wrote the majority opinion, striking down Pennsylvania's personal liberty law and had been used to prosecute Edward Prigg for seizing Margaret Morgan, an escaped Maryland slave, and returning her and her children, one of whom had been free in Pennsylvania. free in Pennsylvania to bondage. Story held that the Congress had exclusive power to legislate the subject of fugitive slave laws under Article 4, Section 2 in the Fugitive Slave Act of 1793, and that no state law, even one protecting a alleged slave, could constitutionally infer. Which that would be another interesting one to look into there, because like it kind of seems like stories going back and forth on his thoughts on slavery here, but really all he's doing is just sticking to the letter of the law and reading it in the best way possible. So moving right on. So this brings us to 1842, and this is Swift v. Tyson, which is, we're going to do a whole show just on this case because it is so important. And this case has been overturned by the 1938 Erie case, which we will also get into because those two lines are directly connected into what we're dealing with today. But anyways, so January 1842, and Swift v. Tyson, he decided the same term as Prigg. Story wrote the unanimous opinion establishing that federal courts sitting in diversity were not bound by state court interpretations of common law and could develop an independent body of federal commercial common law. The rule was a direct expression of his belief in national legal uniformity and served Story's broader vision of a coherent American commercial jurisprudence. The Swift Doctrine governed federal courts practice for 96 years until it was overturned by Erie Railroad Company v. Tompkins in 1938. And there is a whole story behind that because are you aware of who Louis Brandeis is?
Yeah. Yeah, he was the
Yeah.
one that was on the Erie case.
Yeah, yeah. So I just found this out. I haven't pulled the citations for it yet, but apparently FDR was bribed to get so they already had Oliver Wendell Holmes in the Supreme Court, but they bribed FDR to get Louis Brandeis in the Supreme Court. And immediately after that is when Erie Railroad v. Tompkins, then that's when they finally had enough votes to get this through because they had been trying to get rid of this for years. Oliver Wendell Holmes had a secret plot to get rid of federal common law. They finally did it in 1838 after they bribed FDR to get Brandeis into the court. Which did they really have to bribe FDR? Probably not, but that's the story behind it. So, that's the official story. Have you ever heard anything about that?
Yeah. Well, no, I know that they put Louis Brandeis on, the Supreme Court specifically for Erie.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's a whole giant ugly story behind it. But so let's move on because we're over the hour now. So let's finish up with Mr. Story here. So 1842 to 1844, declining health, isolation of the Taney Court. By 1840, Story found himself increasingly at odds with the Taney Court majority on question of federal power, commercial regulations, and constitutional interpretation. His health deteriorated under the combined demands of circuit riding, professional duties, and continuous writing. William Wentmore's Story recorded that his father was often, quote, forced either to assume the attitude of dissent, which was particularly ungrateful to his nature, or by his silence to yield apparent adhesion to doctrine, at variance with all his previous decisions. So, he opposed in 1844, he opposed the annexation of Texas. Story wrote to Honorable Ezekiel Bacon, expressing his firm opposition to the annexation of Texas, which he regarded as both unconstitutional and reckless extension of slave power. He predicted that the admission of Texas as a slave state could lead to a, quote, dissolution of the Union, and called the measure a, quote, a grossly unconstitutional act. He had expressed similar positions privately on the Missouri Compromise and consistently in letters on slavery throughout his career. So, bringing us to April 2nd, 1845, letter to Reverend Brazier announcing intent to resign. So, writing to Reverend John Brazier from Cambridge in April 2nd, 1845, Story discloses that since the presidential election of 1844, he had determined to resign my office as a judge of the Supreme Court, thinking that I could no longer, in the actual state of the country, be of any further use there. He intended to devote himself entirely to the Harvard Law School professorship, and Harvard Corporation had offered him a substantial salary increase to make the transition feasible. He died before he could carry out the resignation. So that brings us September 10th, 1845. Joseph Story died in Cambridge, Massachusetts on September 10th, 1845 at the age of 65 years old from an illness that he had been worsening over a year under the strain of his combined judicial circuit and professorship duties. He died before he could execute his his planned resignation from the Supreme Court. His death was announced in federal courts across the country in Massachusetts, New York, Pennsylvania, and Tennessee, each of which adjourned in tribute. He was buried in Mount Auburn Cemetery in Cambridge, where his grave is marked by a monument executed by his son, William Wetmore Story. Associate Justice Levi Woodburn succeeded him on the court. So that's it. That is it for the life of Joseph Story, a truly amazing man, in my opinion. So you got anything you want to add to that, Whitestone?
No, not without, covering another several hours.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, we could honestly probably keep talking about Mr. Story for another hour here, just winging it on him. But I think you guys have gotten an entire dose of the life of Joseph Story, and we didn't even get a chance to get into some of the cases that he adjudicated. So I guess I'm just going to have to put that on the docket for later days. So that brings us to the end of hour 1 of the Learning Out Loud podcast, episode 15. Thank everybody for joining us. Glad you made it this far, and hopefully we will see everybody over at truelifeproduction.com. Click the Learning Out Loud podcast banner up at the top. Once you're there, click become a member. And for $8 a month, you can be a member and get you can get the second hour of the show, along with all the extra goodies that go with it, the show notes, all of the documents that you see here that we draw from, everything. And that gives you access to our private Telegram group. So hopefully we see everybody over there. And thank you for joining us. And never forget to seek truth and honor the Creator above all. And let that be the whole of the law.
That's the important thing here, is that everyone's word should be meant for a use.
And the words that I'm using today are meant to pull down idols within people's temples.
Meaning that I want to destroy
Falsities that they have idolized.
for their entire life.
And just pull those out and sweep them clean. And before that temple,
And get reinfested with a new lie. Give it true life.